What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That's a guan pa. What a guan? Hey, what a guan?
Three giants of the Premier League. Reigning champions Manchester City.
Brilliant.
Title challengers Arsenal. And perennial giants Chelsea. Your favorite Premier League teams right here on CVM TV. Missed an Arsenal match? Watch the rebroadcast on Arsenal TV. More of a Manchester City fan? No problem. Don't miss a beat with City TV. Supporter of Chelsea? Catch all things from the Blues on Chelsea TV. See it happen right here on CVM TV every Monday at 8 p.m.
I'm me, the style is no scam and I style me.
From the market to the farm to the office, money talk is everywhere. But are you making sense or nonsense? The Bank of Jamaica brings you common sense with BOJ. Real stories, real laughs, and real lessons to help you protect, grow, and manage your money. Mattress savings.
At least my mattress, you charge me to sleep on it.
Partner plan.
Remember last year we needed our payouts early? But Miss Pam gave it to her cousin first.
Or a sketchy loan flyer.
Electrifying deals.
See why making the right financial choices is pure common sense. Brought to you by Bank of Jamaica, empowering everyday Jamaicans one episode at a time.
Grandpa, it's 2026. You can't keep hiding all your money in every single pocket forever.
Tonight, the government is asking taxi operators for a little bit more time. 2.5 years after waiting for an outstanding 16% fare increase, operators say they have run out of patience. The Finance and Transport Ministry met with the association presidents today after threats of taxi strikes. Transport Minister Darrell Vaz says operators should hold strain, but after waiting since April 2024, are taxi operators being asked to wait again. Then a woman is dead after a police shooting in Granville, St. James. An officer has been interdicted. Indicom and iProbe are investigating, and community groups are demanding accountability. Tonight, the opposition says suspensions are no longer enough. And later, a fake gun, but a real charge. The new Firearms Act is now being tested before the courts. A Kingston music producer is sentenced to 15 years and life in prison for 8 fake guns. Prosecutors and defense attorneys are in rare agreement that Parliament got this law wrong. When does tough law become overbroad law? I'm Jodianne Quarry, and this is Lead Story. The government is asking taxi operators for a little bit more time. After years of waiting for an outstanding 16% fare increase that was due more than 2 years ago, Transport Minister Darrell Vaz now says operators should hold strain. The Transport and Finance Ministers convened a meeting with Transport Association presidents at the Transport Centre in Halfway Tree this morning. Tonight, following that meeting, in which Finance Minister Favour Williams and State Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister Senator Adka Fitz-Henley were also present. The Transport Ministry announced that the government is requesting an additional 2 weeks before the final decision is made. That's because the cabinet submission, not the increase, will be brought for determination on June 1. Finance Minister Favour Williams, who was also present, indicated the 16% increase left outstanding, if approved, may be delivered in 2 tranches rather than all at once. Minister Vaz warned operators that any fare adjustment could be quickly erased by rising fuel costs if government subsidies are simultaneously removed. However, not all associations supported today's planned strike action. The St. James Taxi Association called the strike notice premature. Transport Operators Development Sustainable Services President Edgerton Newman has consistently opposed industrial action. The sector is not unified, and that division is also part of the story. So, is June 1 a real commitment for taxi operators, or just another date? Joining us now is Lorraine Finnegan, President of the All Voice Taxi Association. Mr. Finnegan, welcome to Lead Story. President Finnegan? We're making sure that President Finnegan can speak with us right now to update us on the situation confronting taxi association members across the country. This, as some of them threatened to withdraw service today, but en masse didn't do so. However, we spoke with Lorraine Finnegan last week about the concerns of taxi operators, as well as what would likely be their next steps. Given that he said, given that this negotiated increase had been agreed in April of 2023, a 35% increase at that time was appropriate. But a brand new 35% increase might be appropriate now, given the cost of the inputs for taxi operators. Lorraine Finnegan is online with us, but we're making sure that he can hear us clearly and you can hear him clearly as we speak about what took place today with the Finance Minister along with the Minister of Transport meeting with taxi operators and State Minister and in the Office of the Prime Minister, Senator Adka Fitz-Henley, having these conversations with transport stakeholders. President Finnegan, are you still in a position to be able to speak to us this evening as we're making sure? Yes.
I'm hearing you on audio, but not on video.
All right, then. We'll have this conversation on audio while we then make sure that you can be heard. President Finnegan, last we spoke, and that was last week, your position was clear. You needed the 16% increase. You're fighting for it, though, through dialogue. What changed between when we spoke last week and the decision by some taxi operators to threaten withdrawal of service today?
All right, so let me address the withdrawal of service. There was no planned withdrawal of service, and there were no organized withdrawal of service across the length and breadth of Jamaica. What happened Saturday morning is that a live video went out early Saturday morning. The person in the video made some comment about plans being made for a withdrawal of service, and then a voice note followed shortly. And the voice note states that President Finnegan and President Pattison are the organizers of that withdrawal of service. And it was planned in a way that there would be several blocking of road. Well, immediately after those videos and voice notes went out, the police get in touch with me, and I must say that I had been having communication Saturday with the police right up until 8 o'clock. And so I assured them that one, there was no planned demonstration withdrawal of service. And even the Friday before the Saturday, myself and President Pattison had dropped off 3 letters at the Minister of Transportation as it relates to a meeting in regards to the 16% and other related issues. So to clear the air, there was no plan across Jamaica for any form form of withdrawal of service or demonstration.
You've mentioned
today,
President Patterson. Which association is President Patterson part of?
Independent Road Taxis Association. It is one of the newest road taxi associations, and they came here that came on the horizon in February of 2026.
Okay, and so you said you appeared to, coming out of that, have dialogue with the police, had sent those letters now to the Minister of Transport. But we do understand that some taxi association heads were able to meet with the Minister of Transport, Darrell Vaz, Minister of Finance, Favour Williams, and State Minister in the Ministry of the Office of the Prime Minister, Senator Abka Fitz-Henley. Were you a part of that?
Yes, I was.
What was the end result of that meeting today?
All right, the end result, we have been getting several verbal commitments from the minister in March of 2026 for the 16% to be made available to us in June of 2026. No date in June was ever given, but at the meeting today, we get a specific date of the 1st of June that the 16% will now goes to Cabinet for deliberation. And at the end of Cabinet, the 1st of June, we will be told two things. One, what date in June will the 16% be granted? And two, if we will be getting it in 16% or in tranches of 2. Well, we have rejected any tranches of 2. We will wait until the 1st of June, but we want the 16%.
And that tranche, those tranches, that is the breaking up of that 16%, let's say, for example, into 9% and 7% instead of a full 16% as had been requested, is something that Minister of Finance, Favour Williams, we understand, had put on the table. Are you disappointed, though, that June 1 moved from what initially had been announced, we understood, which is that you would get the 16% on June 1, to now this announcement today that the 16% would be brought before Cabinet on June 1?
Well, the first thing is we were never told June 1 before. We were always told in June. So in a meeting we had with the minister on the 11th of March 2026, we were told June. 2 weeks later in a Zoom meeting, he told us June. So today is the first we get a specific, definite date. So we are not disappointed that we didn't get a date today when we'll be getting the 16%, because the finance minister has explained some things to us along with the Minister of Transportation. And what they have explained to us are things that are undisputed, and to allow good sense to prevail, because one of them is, if we were to get the 16% and the government should remove the cap on fuel from $4.50 per week, the 16% would have been wiped out within a second. So we take those into consideration. We take the state of the economy as it relates to the continuous increase in gas prices. We take into consideration that we are the largest movers of goods and service, and a fair adjustment to the public transportation sector could easily move the situation of inflation from where it is now to a more unacceptable level that would have seriously not only damaged the economy in general, but to us as owners and operators within the sector. So we listen carefully, and 2 weeks from now would be June 1st, and the sector is willing to give both ministers an opportunity to do what they are doing and get back to us June 1.
Well, we do await then hearing from you and from the Ministers of Finance and Transportation on the potential for this increase in June. Lorraine Finnegan, President of the All Voice Taxi Association, thank you so much for joining us this evening inside Lead Story.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, we take a break and come back to you here on Lead Story.
feet to walk, run, and take us places. But your feet can do something even more amazing. Join Guardian Group's Shine 5K Night Run Walk and make a stride to support KPH, the Falmouth Hospital, and Project STAR. Saturday, May 23 in Kingston and Saturday, May 30 in Montego Bay. Register at run2shineja.com or runningeventsja.com and see you at Guardian Group's Shine 5K Night Run Walk.
Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That's a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a Guan! Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That's a guan pa. What a guan?
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Yesterday, on Sunday afternoon, May 17, a police officer has now been interdicted following the fatal shooting of a woman in Granville, St. James. She has been identified as 45-year-old Latoya Bolgin, a businesswoman, a mother of two, and a resident of Guns Drive in Granville. She was known in her community as Buju. She was, according to reports, among residents protesting the fatal shooting of 17-year-old Tajay Edwards, also allegedly involving police, 1 week earlier in the same community. The interdicted officer was allegedly there to provide crowd control for that protest. Interdiction means the officer has been officially suspended from active duty while an investigation is pending. Well, Indicom has also confirmed that none of the three officers reportedly assigned to crowd control duties at the protest were issued or wearing body-worn cameras. Community groups have expressed outrage. The Granville Peace, Justice and Resource Development Foundation has called for all officers involved in the operation to be removed from frontline duty pending the outcome of the investigations, not only the officer who has been interdicted. And tonight, there are broader questions emerging about police accountability in Jamaica. Indicom reports 130 fatal security force shootings year to date. Tonight, there are also questions about body-worn cameras after reports that officers assigned to crowd control duties were not issued them. We're also learning that attorney at law and opposition spokesman on youth and human rights, Isaac Buchanan, says he's representing the family of Latoya Bolgin. In a statement this evening, he said, the incident raises serious questions about the conduct of law enforcement, the absence of body-worn cameras, and what he calls the state's constitutional obligation to protect life. Opposition spokesman on national security, Fitz Jackson, has made it clear, however, suspensions are no longer enough. Joining me now is Fitz Jackson, opposition spokesman on national security and member of parliament for St. Catherine Southern. Mr. Jackson, welcome to Lead Story.
Thanks to the story.
Fitz Jackson, you've acknowledged the speed of the interdiction of the police officer, one of them involved in this incident, but you said publicly that suspensions like these are no longer enough. What would you consider specific institutional mechanisms, or what would you consider as those mechanisms to be enough in Jamaica's current accountability framework?
Early stages of the coronavirus, and we had the restrictions. A gentleman came on television and made some derogatory remarks about the Prime Minister. He was apprehended by the police. He was locked up. He was not given a warning. He was detained because of those verbal expressions. Now, what happened in Granville, where Miss Bulgin was killed in cold blood in the sight of many persons, including fellow police officers. Identity of the person who fired the shot was known, and we know that the person is dead. But the person who perpetrated that act is free to go home. The victims of that, the family and community members of the victim, can't believe that there is justice in such instance. There is no balance. There is no proportionality of response when it is somebody else as against other person on the other hand. The officer should be detained immediately in light of the evidence that is available to the police high command. And it will send a serious message, at least to the family and the community at large. That's against the background why I made a comment about the interdiction. And again, we don't know what the terms of the interdiction, the terms are. You can be interdicted with full pay, and that's that you can't go to work, quarter pay, half pay. We don't know what the terms of the interdiction is. And I said it's against the background of where the clear evidence exists.
You're talking about that clear evidence. There is CCTV footage that has been shared online, has gone viral, has been shared by news sources that have allowed persons to have this conversation. However, there are no body-worn cameras that had been indicated to be there. Indicom confirming that none of the three officers on crowd control duty at that time had been issued body-worn cameras. Isaac Buchanan from the People's National Party, he's your opposition spokesperson on human rights, an attorney at law. He says he's representing the family, calling for national accountability, including an explanation for why body-worn cameras were not in use. Does this particular incident, against then this backdrop of a continued discussion, especially since January, about the use of body-worn cameras, mean that we need to have a national policy response and not just like a case-by-case incident assessment of why we didn't have body-worn cameras there?
Or not, was not satisfied about the explanation being given or the rationale being given why body-worn cameras are not operational. A couple of years ago, the Minister of National Security, the Prime Minister, promised, one, the procurement and all the support for it. We have heard from the Commissioner himself and the Minister about the architecture, the technical backbone that is required for the body-worn camera to be effective. We hear all the technical explanation. You know, if I have a medical procedure to be performed to heal my problem, cure my problem, it is for the doctor to work those out. Tell me what they need. If it's me to pay X amount for them to procure either the expertise, the equipment that is needed, get it done. For over 2-3 years, we have been being told the same thing. At the end of the day, we're having police operations on an ongoing basis, planned operations without the use of the body-worn cameras. And let me say this. It is imperative for that to be in place for a myriad of reasons, amongst them to protect the integrity of the police officers who are important to us and who are dear to us. We as a people and as a country, we rely on the police. Their integrity is important. We have acquisitions made in many instances, but this year over 130 persons killed already by the police. And there are two different stories. The police report one thing, persons who happen to be on the scene report something, and who are we to believe? it is elusively clear that with the use of the body-worn camera, we can remove those doubts from people's mind. Those who are victims, and justifiably so, because I'm going to repeat what I've said many times over. Anyone that attack a police, threaten the life and safety of a police, and they should be killed in protection of their life, I don't have a difficulty with it. But there are too many cases that being reported where we can't independently substantiate that. And it's for that reason, there's just one answer that is important to me and many Jamaicans. Where are the darn things on your planned operations so that we can remove as much doubt as possible? It is as simple as that. In the instant case, many persons are saying if it wasn't for the CCTV and other persons who are videoing, they are pretty confident that the report would be somebody draw a gun on the police, return fire, and they were shot by the police.
Fitzjackson, there are also concerns that have been raised about what happens when someone is injured around police officers, because in other jurisdictions there are concerns about what have been called false rescues, where shooting victims are transported by the police rather than emergency services. It can compromise a crime scene, the evidence there, and it can delay proper medical intervention. There are those concerns that have been raised as well, that there needs to have been attempts to resuscitate, attempts to help. What should the public expect then in terms of first aid, medical assistance, or attempts to preserve life for a person who's been shot during a police operation?
Look, we live in a jurisprudence that says everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And even if someone attempts to injure the police officer or anybody else, and you have to shoot that person, the first thing is to preserve that person's life, even if they are guilty. Even if they are guilty. So all the precautionary steps, all the preventative steps to prevent death ought to be taken. That happens in a lot of other jurisdictions, right? Why can't we here?
Well, we do have force orders here that say that this is something that is expected by Jamaica Constabulary Force officers as well.
Well, at this point, I need to better inform my own self in terms of what the standing procedures are in that regard. But in the absence of that, I don't need to read anything to tell me that if something happens that causes somebody to be dying, right, as a law enforcement officer, and as a decent citizen, we should take the necessary steps to preserve your happiness. I don't need to read anywhere to tell me that that's a proper thing to do when your life is not threatened by somebody who has been injured.
Well, Fitzjackson, we now know that Indicom has been called in to investigate. The Jamaica Constabulary Force's High Command has issued a statement. iProbe is investigating. Indicom has asked anyone with information, especially those in the vehicle with her, to share what they know. And this is a continuing investigation, but a horrific one that has now had the country up in arms, watching what has taken place there in Granville, St. James.
When I watched that video yesterday of what took place, I became cold. It was just unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I have our police in high regard. Police officers across this country are people who I know personally for many years, their families, many well-thinking, decent police officers in the force. Things like these tarnish their reputation, tarnish the well-being of their families, and that's the reason why we can't allow any of these kinds of action to go without maximum penalty, swift investigation, and the justice system will come into court.
Fitzjackson, right, to restore public confidence as well would be an important thing. But Fitzjackson, opposition spokesman on national security and member of parliament for St. Catharines Southern. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking about this inside Lead Story tonight. Still ahead, what could a toy gun do? Well, it might land you behind jail for 15 years. We'll talk about that next inside Lead Story.
Make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Hey, what I want? Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a Guan. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah. Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
The new Firearms Act was designed to help Jamaica confront violent crime. But now the law is being tested in cases involving imitation firearms, including the recent case involving a music producer. And many Jamaicans are only now discovering how severe the law can be. In December 2023, a joint police-military operation entered the home of 47-year-old Ewayne Price, a Kingston music producer, at Grand Spend Drive in Kingston 8. They found 8 imitation firearms. Price told investigators they were props used in music videos. On February the 10th of this year, Price was convicted in the Supreme Court Gun Court Division of 8 counts of possession of a prohibited weapon and of stockpiling prohibited weapons. Last week, he was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment on the possession charges and life imprisonment for stockpiling under the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulations Act 2022. He'll be eligible for parole after 10 years. The objects that produced that sentence could not fire a single bullet. For some, they might be called toy guns. But the government has already signaled that amendments may come to that piece of legislation, given what some have considered to be a perverse outcome. So, tonight, what does the law actually say? What counts as an imitation firearm? And how much discretion do judges really have? Joining me now is attorney at law Alexander Shaw. Alexander Shaw, welcome to Lead Story.
Hi, Jody. Thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers.
Mr. Shaw, for viewers who may not have read the Firearms Act, explain in simple terms what we're talking about, where the law talks about an object that looks like a gun but can't fire a single bullet.
Well, the law makes no distinction with respect to an actual, a firearm that is capable of discharging bullets and an imitation in terms of the sentencing. So once you are found with something looking like a firearm, whether or not it is capable of discharging bullets, the law treats all firearms the same way. So the individual who has an actual firearm that is capable of discharging deadly bullets will get the same time as the person who has an imitation firearm. And the rationale is that in real time, a police or any victim is unable to distinguish between the actual firearm and an imitation. But as we are now seeing, though, the injustice arising from, a situation where, as in this particular case, the weapon was being used for, art, I may say, a music video.
And that's in particular, you're referring to the case of Ewayne Price, a 47-year-old music producer in Kingston who has been sentenced to not 1 year, don't do it again, but 15 years for possession and life imprisonment for what has been referred to as stockpiling. Even though he had 8 imitation firearms, he told investigators were being used for music videos. Under the law as it is currently written, especially given what you've just explained to us, where the law doesn't make a distinction, is that sentence legally correct?
Well, it is legally correct. This new Firearms Act does not allow for judicial discretion, and we have been arguing at the bar that, albeit the Privy Council has said that mandatory minimum sentences are constitutional, we believe that they have the impact of taking away judicial independence, and that principle of sentencing that each case should be decided on its own facts, and a judge should take into account the person in the dock, meaning that place where the accused person stays for the entire trial, meaning the person's antecedents as well, who this person is when applying a sentence. But this particular legislation does not allow for that, because there is a mandatory minimum. It doesn't care who you are or what you are before the court, as in the particular facts that you're before the court for. Once it's a firearm offense, imitation or no imitation, then you are likely to be convicted for a minimum of 15 years.
This sounds incredibly unfair to people who are listening to you right now, Alexander Shaw, because then they're starting to think to themselves, are we talking about a toy gun that's a water gun? How close to a real gun does it need to look before the law makes a distinction? But you're saying if you have somebody like this who had these guns, the law calls what he did stockpiling, having those 8 imitation guns, he's using it as a film director, as props in a costume box for a music video, the law doesn't care. That's what the law says. Parliament passes this law, though. Did you think Parliament understood the full reach of what it was enacting when it put this into law?
Yes. I don't think there was any misunderstanding, because, as I've said before, the argument for this particular provision was that one cannot distinguish between an imitation firearm or an actual firearm. Insofar as they look alike, then that is the test. And so the police officers, the victims are saying, we don't know if it's a water gun. It looks like a real gun. And we don't really want to know if it's a real gun. Insofar as you're using it for an unlawful purpose, then that is sufficient. But it is unfair. You have made the point you have asked the question whether it's actually unfair. It is unfair because there's a saying in Jamaica that circumstances alter cases, and that is why jackass reverses. So I say that to say that the particular circumstances will cause one to consider long and hard whether or not the particular provision is in fact appropriate. But our judges do not have that discretion again. That has been taken away with this new piece of legislation, and we're seeing so many cases of this particular nature, and we will continue to see more until and unless there are amendments to the legislation, because it's not just about this particular provision. There are many other provisions that are problematic.
Before we get to those problematic provisions, because I do want to hear from you on this as an attorney who practices in the courts and would have experience in these particular cases, there's an argument that's being raised about it being disproportionate as well. Some saying he wasn't in a circumstance where he was attempting to use this gun against someone, using it and pretending to, either holding them up or the like, with these imitation firearms, and therefore the principle of proportionality, that the punishment is disproportionate to the harm, is being violated here. He has them in a box. He is now met by the police and security forces, the police and the military in that joint operation, and they find him with VED. And these are objects that can't shoot. How strong a constitutional challenge is that? That even if there is some punishment, this punishment is woefully disproportionate.
Well, I'm in full agreement with that because, as I've said before, that is the basis for judicial discretion, to allow a judge to consider whether or not the sentence is proportionate. Mandatory minimum sentences take away that altogether. So that concept, that principle of proportionality, is not reflected in sentencing where you have a mandatory minimum. So I'm in agreement with you.
This is something that comes to the national attention. You said that there are very many other cases that test this principle as well, especially as this new piece of legislation has now been brought before the country. Let's talk about that next after we take a break here inside Lead Story this evening.
Lucozade, bring the energy. Unbeatable taste, new look.
Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That a guan pa. What a guan?
Jamaica's newest and boldest football competition, the Popeyes Challenge Cup, rolls on with round 2 action Tuesday, May 19 from St. Elizabeth. Buoyed by a 2-0 opening round win over Wi-Fi United, Limehall of St. Anne look to eliminate Stet's Elite Football Academy from St. Elizabeth. And Humble Lion enter the competition with the aim of knocking out their corporate area opponents, Medforest FC, with both teams in unfamiliar territory. It's round 2 of the Popeyes Challenge Cup. Humble Lion battle Medforest at 4:30 p.m. and Stet's Elite FA take on Limehall in the feature at 7:45 p.m. Live on CVM TV. This is David versus Goliath. This is win or go home. This is the Popeyes Challenge Cup.
Before the break, attorney at law Alexander Shaw and I were discussing the Firearms Prohibition, Restriction and Regulation Act 2022 and the case of music producer Ewayne Price, who was sentenced last week to 15 years and life imprisonment for 8 imitation firearms. You might call them toy guns. You can call them anything you feel like. It doesn't matter. The law doesn't care. National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang has signaled that an amendment bill will be tabled this year with the intention of relocating the imitation firearm offence to a lower sentencing tier and restoring some degree of judicial discretion. However, the bill not yet tabled, and until it's passed, the law as it stands is the law that applies. So, Alexander Shaw and I will continue this discussion. Mr. Shaw, if the government is already signaling amendments, where do you think the biggest problems exist in this act that they do need to amend?
I think the fundamental issue with the legislation is the fact that there is no judicial discretion. That for me is what is problematic. Because when you look at even the fact that a person who wants to plead guilty, having, confessed that this firearm was mine, there is no incentive, and so there are greater backlogs now in court because the judge really can't make a decision that will benefit the accused in some way, or if not benefit, but encourage more persons who are before the court to plead guilty. So you'll find that everybody now wants their day in court to ventilate all the, the issues, the tribal issues, even when, that's not necessary.
So judicial backlog then is one of the issues that you're highlighting with this mindset. But would you also agree that the law currently gives prosecutors too much power and judges far too little flexibility as well? Because once you're charged with it, that seems to be at least 15 years.
Yes, and what you find is that you are brought before the court by a police officer who usually initiate the charges. And I don't know that our prosecutors, are brave enough to say, well, this shouldn't really be before the court. They want to ensure that, whatever charges are laid, then let the court make a decision. Because the fear may very well be that, if you should take a decision that is actually justifiable and is in keeping with, this principle of a prosecutor being a minister of justice, it may go against the notion that you should be a part of crime fighting and to help Jamaica to rid itself of the high crime rate. And I think when you look at even the antecedent, when you look at how we got here with the firearms, this new Firearms Act and even the new Bail Act, there were concerns in different spheres of Jamaica that our judges were not tough on crime fighting, and as a result, there were so many new legislations, the Firearms Act and the Bail Act to be specific, that came as a result to assist prosecutors and the police to reduce crime. And I'm not certain that actually that those criticisms were in fact true or were fair. And as a result, what we're seeing now is, a travesty of justice, I may say.
And a rare thing is happening right now. Well, prosecutors and defense attorneys are on the same page about this right now, saying, you know what, they're in rare agreement that the law needs to change. When the legal community as a whole looks at Parliament and says, you actually do need to change this, what's the obligation on Parliament to act and to act quickly?
Well, the Parliament reflects the will of the people, I will always say. And even though, we as practitioners, we actually treating with the ills of these two legislations. Yes, the minister has indicated that the amendments will come very soon, but at what cost? Because what we're seeing now, as I've said before, the system is backlogged. So I would hope that good sense will prevail, not just in terms of imitation firearm, but also the other concerns that we have raised, to ensure that the legislation actually works. Because the intended purpose is to, send a strong message that firearm offenses are in fact serious. And we get that. But at the same time, you really have to ensure that it does not disrupt and disturb the fundamental principles of justice, which is what we're seeing now in terms of judicial discretion, sentencing, proportionality, and all that we have been talking about for the longest while.
National Security Minister Horace Chang has signaled that the amendment will likely relocate the imitation firearm offence, moving it to a lower sentencing tier. So it won't be 15 years, it'll be lower. I'll put here perhaps something like 5. However, the Advocates Association of Jamaica has called for the 15-year mandatory minimum to be abolished entirely. What's the argument for eliminating it rather than simply lowering it, as the Minister of National Security has suggested?
I agree, because eliminating the mandatory minimum allows a judge to treat the case based on the specific circumstances. So if an individual is before the court and he or she used that firearm or to commit a very grave offense, and the court is of the view that, listen, you really should get 15 years, you really should get 20 years, then there is nothing stopping a judge from imposing that sentence. But when there is a case where, it's really a misunderstanding. For example, today I was in court and the matter concerns a security guard that is said to have used the firearm, in an unlawful way. It wasn't really unlawful. And so it turns out now that the complainant realizes that, listen, this is just not good, and said, listen, I want to end this because I would not want a security guard to go to prison for 15 years. But the court could not on its own volition do that. So if it is that, that matter was properly ventilated and the individual was convicted, you're talking about somebody using now a licensed firearm and would get the same sentence as somebody who is using an unlawful firearm to commit heinous offenses.
And we're watching a number of those cases before the courts right now, including a number of high-profile cases involving the Firearms Act as well, and figuring out where that line is under the new piece of legislation. But in the Price matter, Ewain Price there, that music producer with the 8 imitation firearms, who's now before the courts, or rather who has been before the courts, 15 years sentence, life sentence now for stockpiling. Attorney-at-law Bert Samuels has called for the Governor General to intervene in that Price matter to grant him a pardon. What would be the legal basis for that call, and what avenue of relief does that represent within our constitutional framework to perhaps fix some of the issues that you have spoken of?
Well, and it goes back to what we have been saying. Now, Mr. Samuel had to make that call because there is no other option. You can't get a certificate to go by the Court of Appeal for a lesser sentence, and many of these provisions, the Parole Act, is ousted in a sense. That is the section particularly so well, listen, the Parole Act should not apply here.
And you're saying that he can't go to the Court of Appeal because he has received the minimum sentence under the law, so there's no lower for the Court of Appeal with this on the books to go in this particular case?
That is so.
This is so much for so many Jamaicans. For the very first time, Alexander Shaw, they're hearing you and they're going, what is that fake gun? But I was just playing. And they don't understand the seriousness of this piece of legislation and what had been intended to, as you said, to keep people safe, to make sure that people weren't being threatened with imitation firearms. But the end results of this perhaps have been overbroad and, as you said, might need some revision.
It's funny, I tell you a joke. Yesterday, a friend of mine was actually going through a barrel that he got many years ago and found a very old toy gun. They used to send toy guns back in Christmas time and so. And I said to him, hey, that's 15 years there, I'm not touching it. And quickly, he destroyed it because the fear is that if a police should come now and catch you in possession of that, then you're looking at 15 years. And it's that frightening, and one would want to believe that the legislation is intended to treat with criminals, persons who are using a firearm, or imitation to actually harm society. No, a toy gun be used for the creative arts should not be a part of this discussion at all. But here we are.
But here we are. And there are a series of things that an individual can do if they're going to use it for creative purposes. Reporting to the police is a whole raft of measures that could allow for this creative expression. But if you do fall afoul of the law, Alexander Shaw, attorney at law, has made it very clear there is no room for you. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. So many Jamaicans didn't get how serious it was. You have put the fear of the Lord in them tonight, destroying all imitation guns. Won't be buying anymore. Alexander Shaw, thanks for joining us tonight inside Lead Story.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's it for today's edition of Lead Story. On behalf of the entire production team here, thank you for watching the show. I'm Jody Ann Quarry. Have a fantastic evening, and I hope you stay safe. Up next, CVM News.